All right, welcome everybody to the special edition of the Walkoff. I'm proud to be joined once again by Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated. Pat, I want to get right into it. Obviously, we have some big news out of Mets camp today. Jeff McNeil going to be out for about a month with an oblique issue. My first thing that came to my mind was just more opportunity for Brett Beatty, more opportunity for Acuna, maybe even Donovan Walton. What have you heard, and what are your thoughts just in general on that situation?
Well, it's in the very, very early stages right now. Of course, Carlos Mendoza revealed to reporters this morning in Florida that McNeil, he's probably going to be out around 3 to 4 weeks with the right oblique strain. The good news is it is a low grade strain, but David Stearns previously had mentioned that, hey, we have our young guys. They're going to get a shot this year in one shape or form or another. And now it's happening pretty early. So guys like Luis Angel Acuna, Brett Beatty, it makes sense to me to carry them on the opening day roster, have one of them play second base, and then you also have a backup shortstop, a natural shortstop in Luis Angel Acuna, and just see what those guys can do. Maybe have them split duties at second base. McNeil's played a lot more second base since last year after getting demoted in May. So yeah, I mean, I think that the Mets, it's time to see what they have with some of these guys, and now is the opportunity with McNeil at least sidelined for a minimum of the course over the next month or so.
Yeah, and especially with Beatty, I mean, this is the big year for him, of course, obviously, and he's had a big spring. What do you think the confidence level of him at second base is? I know he really hasn't played any big league games, if at all, at second base. What do you think that the organization thinks about him playing second base to start the year?
I think they trust him at second base. I think he's gotten enough reps there since last year, and he's athletic enough. Because keep in mind, he was pretty solid defensive third baseman, and he is, and he's an athlete. So I think second base is kind of come a little bit naturally to him. Maybe not at first, but now he's starting to look more comfortable over at that position. And I think Beatty himself is just eager to get playing time, to get another big league shot. He knows that these chances aren't unlimited, and Vientos dethroned him at third base with the monster year he had last year. So yeah, I think Beatty's just excited probably to get in there and get another opportunity. And he's been hitting well in Grapefruit League play. I believe he's been hitting about 370, 1200 OPS. So yeah, I mean, I think the Mets never were down on Beatty. You know what I mean? Like everyone I've talked to in that organization over the course of the past 6 months or so, it has said that they're still high on him. And you know, while the right opportunity in the trade market, if it came along for Beatty, the Mets were at least listening on other teams who were interested in him, but they wound up keeping him, of course. And yeah, they still believe in his talent and his potential. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that he was the number 2 prospect in the Mets system behind Francisco Alvarez, and it wasn't too long ago that he was a top 100 prospect in all of baseball. There's a lot of hype around him. 2019 first round pick, so he's still young. And him and Vientos are best of friends, and they push each other competitively. So that's also another healthy kind of battle the Mets have had in camp this year, even though it is Vientos' job at third base after what he did for the team. But yeah, that's just something to have Vientos there and have that close relationship with Beatty kind of makes Beatty a better player, and it makes Vientos a better player. So yeah, I mean, now we should be seeing what Beatty has as a second baseman offensively and defensively pretty soon here.
And when you brought up the trademark, it made me think of Starling Marte. I know you had some reporting about that. They
Yeah.
were shopping him a little bit over the offseason. Obviously, McNeil, one of his big strengths is versatility. And this is only 3 to 4 weeks. We don't know, how severe it's going to be. But do you think this injury makes, David Stearns think in the back of his head, maybe I'm not going to trade Starling Marte at the deadline. Maybe I'm not going to shop him just because the outfield depth is so important. And this is a big shot at the outfield depth.
Yeah, I think that the Mets were pretty set on not trading Marte once the deal, at least through my reporting, back in winter meetings in December in Dallas, the Mets had a deal on the table for Hunter Harvey. The Kansas City Royals would have gotten Marte in a deal, and the Mets would have gotten Hunter Harvey. This was well before they signed Minter. It was well before they re-signed Stanek. So yeah, I think that at that point the Mets were willing to do that deal. The Royals balked on that deal. And since then, there hasn't really been too much traction for a trade. I think that was the most serious deal, to my knowledge, at least through my reporting, that the Mets had on the table. And now, yeah, the expectation, as I reported a couple of weeks ago, the expectation is Marte is going to stick around with the Mets. They want him. He wants to be here. This is the last year of his deal. Like he's accepted the fact that he's a part-time player now. But hey, he came back from the IL in August last year from that knee injury, and he served as a part-time player because the Mets already had traded for Winker. They didn't have Soto yet, of course, but they had Winker, and they had a pretty deep outfield. And Marte was really like kind of that part-time player, but he contributed, and he contributed in the postseason as well. And I think he's the type of veteran player who's able to produce even when he's not playing every day, despite the fact that he's been an everyday player his whole career pretty much. Yeah, I think that Marte does have value, although he's making about 20 million this year. The Mets have made their beds already with the luxury tax and the bounce that they surpassed this year by bringing back Pete. They still have Marte on the roster, so I think that Marte, having his bat around, having that experience. He's very popular in the clubhouse. He's one of the team's leaders. So veteran guy and versatile too, can play all three outfield positions. So you look at Brandon Nimmo, who's dealing with knee soreness. He's going to be in the lineup today for the first time in 13 days. He's still dealing with the plantar fasciitis a little bit. So you got to keep Nimmo fresh. You got to avoid any further setbacks, losing him for a significant portion of time this year. And that's where Marte comes in again, because he can play left field, and Nimmo DHing and maybe even being on the IL at some point this year will probably help him in the long run with his knee issue, with his plantar fasciitis. So yeah, it does make too much sense for the Mets to hold on to Marte. And that report that I mentioned from a couple of weeks ago, the follow-up report I had, expectation is that they'll keep Marte, but if the right deal came along, the Mets would still deal him. Now we're a lot further along. We're very close to opening day, so I would be surprised if they did wind up dealing Marte in a trade. I think that he's going to be a Met come opening day.
Yeah, and I hate to stick with the injury news. Unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of injuries, but Garrett Cole, the whole story, Garrett Cole, obviously the biggest story of the spring thus far, out for the year with Tommy John. I want to make a little bit of a Mets connection to this, as weird as it sounds.
Yeah.
Kodai Senga, obviously coming off an injury-ridden season. We've seen the changes they made with him in terms of his prep, with coming into the backfields and everything like that. What do you think? First of all, do you think it's going to work with the changes they're doing? And do you see maybe a six-man rotation in the future as a way to kind of make Senga feel a little bit more comfortable in the major leagues?
Well, the Mets kicked the tires on the idea of a six-man rotation. Then injuries happened. Frankie Montas, high-grade lat strain, and Sean Manaea with a right oblique strain, which the Mets got good news on Manaea. He has started playing catch again. After I believe he got a PRP injection, and he does not feel pain anymore. So he's on track. Manaea will be back in the next month or so. And that's why the Mets didn't panic. I was very surprised that they didn't bring back Jose Quintana a couple of weeks ago. I mean, Quintana really wanted to come back and made that known. And the Mets the Mets saw him at a certain value, and he saw himself at a certain value. And the player is totally entitled to go out there and see what they can get. And Quintana got a pretty solid deal from the Brewers that the Mets just weren't willing to match, I guess. And the Mets brought in Jose Urena, who was a solid reliever / swingman starter for the Rangers last year, 3.80 ERA, I believe. That's a good depth piece to have on a minors deal. And yeah, the Mets are not going to be going with a six-man rotation to start the year because of the injuries they've had. But they still have Senga now back healthy, and they're hoping that it stays that way. And David Peterson coming off a breakout year. Clay Holmes has looked really, really sharp in spring training, as has Griffin Canning, who they brought in, as has Tyler McGill. So those are probably the five guys who they're going to start the season with. And as you and I both know, given the way the early season schedule is with days off and whatnot, teams don't necessarily need a fifth starter in the first couple of weeks of the season, but the Mets have that those five, and Manaea should be back by mid to late April at the latest. So that'll help as well. Montas we probably won't see till June, or probably June, I would say. If all goes well and avoiding any setbacks. But I think that's what the Mets had in mind. I mean, they signed Montas to a 2-year deal, $34 million, and the second year of the deal is a player option. So Montas has been injured, shoulder injury, surgery the last couple of years, and he made 31 starts last year for the Reds and the Brewers, and the Mets saw him quite a bit down the stretch of the season, in the regular season with the Brewers in his finale of his regular season, and then in the wild card round, and they really liked what they saw. And if Montas is healthy for the stretch run and the postseason run, that's what the Mets are looking at, and how he could be a contributor. I mean, his health has been very, very shaky over the last couple of years, but last year stayed healthy and contributed down the stretch, and that's how the Mets envision him. So if he comes back this year, that's the expectation. Of course, he comes back this year and he stays healthy the rest of the way. They're looking at potentially a frontline starter with, that's the pitcher that he was when he was in Oakland years ago, and it wasn't that long ago either. It was 3 years ago. So yeah, I think the Mets are looking at a frontline starter there to help as a reinforcement, to whereas they won't have to trade for a starter at the deadline, because starting pitching is always super, super expensive at the trade deadline every year.
Yeah, and you mentioned Clay Holmes. I think he's a really intriguing option for the Mets. Obviously, he was a starter 5-6 years ago with Pittsburgh, hasn't done it since, so essentially a new starter. Where do you see them in terms of, I know this is early to ask this question, in terms of innings, how many innings he's potentially going to throw, And even with him, do you see them getting maybe an extra day of rest every once in a while? Because I mean, it's got to be tough for a guy that's a veteran to totally transition to being a starter.
He was a starter in the beginning of his career, his rookie year in 2018, but that was a long time ago. That was 7 years ago now. He's been cross training as a starter all offseason. He's been building up in Grapefruit League play, and he's done a pretty good job. I mean, I believe his last start was 3 2/3 and 9 strikeouts. So that's really impressive. The Mets feel like they've unlocked some things in him. He's added some new pitches to his arsenal as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question about how many innings can Clay Holmes, a reliever / closer, the last couple of years, how many innings will he give them? I think if he gives them between 125 and 140 innings, I think that's a win for the Mets. And we'll see how he responds to the starter's workload this year, because it has been a while since he was a starter.
Yeah, and I want to. I'll let you go in a few minutes. I don't want to keep you too long. I want to end with a little bit of a broader baseball question.
Yeah.
ESPN and Major League Baseball, their relationship's at an end after this season. They've had a relationship for what, about 30 years now, 25, 30 years. Where do you see this going? Because I think if it goes to another streaming service, it's nothing but bad for the game. Do you see them having another national option? Maybe that's just your opinion. I don't know if you heard anything, but I think it's an
Um,
intriguing question.
it is. That's a really good question. Well, we've seen SNY has partnered with MLB TV.
Hmm.
Fox and MLB have their partnership as well. I don't really know where that's headed or what what that's like, right now, what the outlook is like, but they do have that. I think everything's headed towards streaming services. That's just the way it seems. It just seems like that's the direction things are going, because you look at RSNs, regional sports networks, they're all kind of dying. Bally Sports and and you see, Diamond Sports Group and stuff like that. Like, you see like how it affected teams like the Texas Rangers, the Atlanta Braves, the Diamondbacks, like teams that really have not spent much money over the last couple of years, even though, hey, the Braves won the World Series in 2021. The Rangers won the World Series in 2023. And then guess what? Their RSNs were whatever happened there with the RSNs, going under, losing money. And, then the teams weren't able to bring back guys like Jordan Montgomery. The Braves weren't able to bring back Freddie Freeman. Like, they did bring in Matt Olson and they extended him. But like the Braves have starting pitching injuries right now. They don't have a good farm system right now. Very thin on depth, very thin on pitching depth. And all they did really was sign Jerickson Profar, which Profar is a good player, but that's, 3 years, $42 million was like the highest contract they dished out. And I will give credit to the Arizona Diamondbacks, because they did spend big on Corbin Burns. I did not expect that to happen. And they put their money where their mouth was, I guess, even though they're not like, they're not a team that gives much mouth. You know what I mean? They're not the Yankees. They're not the Mets. They're not the Dodgers, the Phils, the Red Sox. Diamondbacks stepped up, and that I was impressed with that. And I will applaud the Red Sox right now too, since I mentioned them. I think the Red Sox are the favorite in the AL East this year. I love what they've done. Garrett Crochet, they have Houck at the top of the rotation, but Garrett Crochet trade, Walker Buehler if he's healthy, and Alex Bregman, of course. And they already had a very talented team and a great manager. So I'm not going to overly gas up the front office of the Red Sox for finally acting like the Red Sox for the first time in a long time. But I do like the team they have assembled. And my prediction is Mets-Red Sox World Series, rematch of 86, the curse of Buckner. And, maybe the Mets break their 39-year curse, or maybe the Red Sox get their 5th title since 2004. Time will tell, but I think that would be a pretty cool matchup. And just like based off the Final Four last year, it was Mets and Dodgers, and it was Yankees and Guardians. I think the Yankees have too many significant injuries really to go to the World Series this year. Could they still be in the ALCS? Yes. Would it be interesting if it was Yankees Red Sox ALCS? Yes, of course, the rivalry. And I think the Mets and Dodgers will rematch each other in the NLCS. I do like what the Cubs have done. I do like the Diamondbacks, of course. Maybe the Giants. I like Willie Adames is a really good player. Brewers, Cardinals, maybe. I think the Pittsburgh Pirates. I think the Pirates and the A's are going to surprise some people this year. I'll leave it on that note. I think the Braves are going to be disappointing, and I think the Mets and Phillies will be in the playoffs. I think the Mets are going to win the East this year. I'll say that now. I mean, I know the Phillies have a very good rotation, but they ran out of gas. They ran out of gas last year. Then they really started running out of gas from June on last year. So I do think that the Mets, if they can now get their guys healthy, no one's really suffered any serious injuries yet. So yeah, I think if they stay relatively healthy, I think the Mets will win the East this year.
I like those predictions. I like the Red Sox respect too. I don't think that team's getting enough respect.
Yeah,
But thank you
and
so much for joining.
The Tigers too.
Yeah, that's another. Their Tigers are very interesting in the American League
Yeah,
for sure. Thank you very much for joining the show, Pat. I know you have a
of
very busy
course.
schedule. Appreciate you having you on. You're always welcome to come on again,
Thank
and
you.
enjoy the rest of the spring.
Thanks, Anthony. You too. Appreciate it.